Welcome everybody, the time has finally come. It is time for the review. This video contains opinions, it is not facts. This is just my opinions of the DLC. Everything here is my opinion, it is not a fact, it is an opinion. It is an opinion. An opinion. Okay? It's not a fact, it's an opinion. Now, this review is going to be structured in a very specific way, so I'm just going to explain that really quickly before we get into this. And I hope it's really quickly because I have a lot of notes. So I'm going to judge the DLC in 3 different criteria for each faction. So I'm going to do 3 different criteria for the Wood Elves and 3 different criteria for the Rats. Now these criteria are the Legendary Lords themselves, the new units, and the faction mechanics. Now for each of these criteria for each faction, I'm going to give them a score out of 5 for a total score of out of 30 for the entire DLC. And at that point, you'll be able to tell whether the DLC is any good and whether it's worth your hard-earned moolah. Last thing before we get into this, thank you so very much for viewership over the course of this DLC period. It's been a lot of work to make this many videos in such a short time, and it really would be a lot more sad if there weren't so many of you being so very nice and watching the videos and leaving comments and leaving likes. So thank you very much for that. And yes, I hope any new subscribers do decide to stick around because, you know, I really do really have been trying to push out the content lately. But without further ado, let's get into this because I have a lot of notes. So for the new Legendary Lords, I'm going to judge how they play in campaign, battle, and just really what they bring to their respective factions. So first of all, starting with the Sister of Twilight from the Wood Elves. Now, they're very cool design-wise, you know, the one mind being separated amongst 2 people. It's very cool. It's not really been done before. Someone did mention that Skarsnik is technically a 2-entity Legendary Lord, but, you know, that's a guy and his squig rather than 2 women riding an eagle or a dragon. So it's something that's never been done before, so I really do appreciate that. Now, in battle, they are a really strong and versatile unit. You know, they are, I've mentioned this a load of times, like the Reaper Claw Bolt Thrower. They do so much range damage, both versus large single entities and versus a lot of infantry. And again, there isn't really anything like them, especially in the Wood Elf roster. You know, all that we have right now is Orion and Durthu, and then eventually Dryker. I know Orion is technically ranged, but these girls have way better range and are more of a focus on doing that, whereas Orion is kind of a multi-class. Now, of course, this are also really good on the front lines, but their range damage is just out of this world. They're also such a well-rounded unit that the faction's Legendary Lords were really lacking, so it's a very welcome change that they're in, and they've definitely secured their place as one of the iconic Wood Elf Lords in the game. Overall, no other Wood Elf Lord plays like them in battle, so it's really refreshing for both people that have never played any Wood Elves before, and also people that have been playing the Wood Elves and have maxed out, you know, all the interest in getting out of all the characters. These guys are totally different, so you'll definitely enjoy them. As a faction leader, they have quite a focus on flying units, whilst also buffing the main backbone of any Wood Elf army, which is, of course, the ranged units. Things like increasing the ammo of all units by 10%, that is just fantastic for, you know, Deepwood Scouts and Waystalkers. 10% ammo, they can do so much more work for you, so it's extremely good to take them in your campaigns. Giving all Hawk Riders the Volley of Kurnos ability is pretty bananas and can make them extremely overpowered. You know, we've all seen that clip on Reddit of the guy, that OKO guy. He does some wacky stuff, and of course he had to make one for this with, you know, 19 of the Volley of Kurnoses, and it works pretty well. Yeah, it just basically gives Hawk Riders another way to do damage on top of, you know, the standard ranged and melee that they can already do. The Volley of Kurnos really brings a lot to them because they're kind of just okay without it. The buffs they give to flying units in their army, the 10 melee attack and the 15 charge bonus, it really does go a long way into making flying units a lot more viable. Flying units, to me, have always been kind of a niche unit, you know, like the Great Eagles and the Dragons. While they are okay and it's alright to have 1 or 2 of them in your army, if you go too overboard, then they just don't really do anything. They're large targets, they get pinned down too easily, they have awful melee attack and defense, and they just get focused down too quickly. But with these buffs, they actually are more decent, so it is really nice and refreshing to be able to use those units when you wouldn't have used them in any other Wood Elf campaign. With all that being said, honestly, I can't see myself giving them any less than 5 out of 5. While they may not be a perfect Lord, they are certainly new and unique in every single way. And really, if you're paying for a new Lord, you want them to be new and unique. So definitely 5 out of 5 for the Sisters of Twilight. Now moving on to Throt the Unclean, of course, is a legendary character in the Warhammer universe. You know, I don't really know much about the lore, but I know a lot of the guys that know about the lore. They were super excited when they found out that Throt was finally coming to Warhammer 2. Because, you know, the modders have been at it for ages trying to get Clan Moulder in. Now, he's a great infantry lord in battles, but the one thing that I have a problem with in battles is that we already have a bunch of great infantry lords for the Rats. You know, we have Queek, who is, of course, the master of all the infantry lords in the Rats. We have Lord Skrolk, who's fantastic. Even Ikit Claw, he's pretty decent in melee. Tretch Craventail, also a fantastic frontlines infantry unit. Even Deathmaster Snitch, you know, he's more of a character-focused assassin, but again, all of them work on the front lines. Some of them are fantastic from a range, you know, they have a couple of spellcasters, but they're not really anything different. They're all just, you know, foot lords, pretty much. There's not anything new in that department, but the buffs that he does bring for monstrous units are very new, and as you're going to find out, his monster focus is really what carries him into being a really good faction and faction leader. Now, the Brood Horror mount type, which is introduced with Clan Moulder and Throt the Unclean, is exceptional, honestly. The great speed, the fantastic damage just catapults Throt the Unclean from being just a decent footlord to a fantastic deadly range lord with fantastic maneuverability that not really any other SKAVEN mount offers. Now, the Doom Wheel is really good, it's exceptional. It's one of everyone's favourite units who's ever played the SKAVEN. But the Brood Horror just brings something totally different. You know, it's much faster, it does massive armor piercing damage, but it's not as mechanical, it's more of a monster, which, you know, fits exactly with the DLC, and is also a lot of fun. Now, the monstrous unit focus is obviously expanded into how he affects the campaign. Increasing the HP of all characters in the faction is a bit of a weird one, since it doesn't really make sense when you first think about it, but when you work into it a little bit more, it really does make sense with, you know, bringing a load of the new Packmaster Lords to help buff any monster units you have in the army, and basically just go around with your Lord, a couple of heroes, and a bunch of monsters. So while it may not be the most direct way to help the monsters, it is pretty useful. On top of this, he also reduces the cost of monsters inside his army and also gives them more armor, which, if you ask me, are the two places where monsters most suffer. They are more expensive, and they're also very vulnerable armor-wise because, you know, they're just monsters, they're exposed. But providing them with a little bit more protection and a reduction in cost, it really does bring them into a more balanced and more desirable unit type. Now for the score, I really don't feel like I can give Throt a 5 since, you know, as I mentioned, we do have a lot of Footlords already, and once he gets on that mount, of course, he is fantastic. But before he gets on that, he's just another Footlord and not really anything exceptional. And his faction effects aren't, you know, out of this world and game-changing. But I think a 3 out of 5 because once he gets on the mount, he's phenomenal, and his faction effects are okay at bringing the monsters to a better place. But, you know, they're not out of this world, fantastic. So I think a 3 out of 5 is a fair place to start. Now moving on to the new units, I'm going to go over how they affect the faction roster, if they shake it up enough, and if they are really worth bringing if you have all the other DLCs. Yeah, that's probably something I should mention. I'm kind of viewing this as the perspective of someone that already owns all the DLCs. There'll be certain points when I mention if you don't own any DLC whatsoever, just Warhammer 2, is this worth it? But otherwise, just assume I'm talking about if you own all of the DLCs. I thought the Wood Elves, the new Wood Elf units really fill some gaps in the roster. It was very clear that CA knew where the Wood Elves were lacking and used these units to fill those gaps. So now I have cheaper spellcasting lords that are fast and nimble rather than the slow and powerful ancient treemen, with some really good high damage monster units in the form of the Zoats, we have some great chaff shredding infantry in the form of the Bladesingers, and we have some massively devastating cav. Now, the one issue I have is that each of these new units, while they do bring something new to the table, they're not completely brand new. You know, we already had cav in the form of the, whatever they're called, the ones that ride the reindeers, and while they may not be as powerful as the Great Stags, they still, you know, fulfill the same role, so it's not completely game-changing to have them new. The same can be said for the infantry units. You know, the Bladesingers, while they are a new type of unit, the Wood Elves already did have a fairly decent front line anyway, and it's not really going to change the way that you play or even build your armies. You know, in fact, it's probably better just to go for Eternal Guard, just have them on the front lines to soak up damage, while the rest of your ranged units do all the work. Now, the Zoats, they do bring something completely new. You know, monstrous units, we had Treekin, but their damage is not it. Whereas the Zoats, they have fantastic armor-piercing anti-large damage, which is perfect for countering Clan Molder, and they're just really a brilliant unit addition to the Wood Elves, because it does shake them up quite a lot. It allows you to bring in more monstrous units that are viable and are also fast, rather than Treekin, which are very slow. It is, of course, important to remember that these units aren't just for the new faction, they're for every Wood Elf faction. So if, you know, you already own the Realm of the Wood Elves, you'll be getting these new units with every faction, rather than just the Sisters of Twilight. That being said, it is kind of weird that none of the units really fit the Sisters playstyle. You know, their focus, as I mentioned, was flying units and also further buffing the backbone, which is, of course, the ranged units. And none of the new units either fly or do range damage. So it is a little bit weird that they're getting bundled with the Sisters of Twilight, who are so focused on those areas, whereas these units just aren't. But, you know, it's not the end of the world. The units are still good. They're just not really themed correctly with the Sisters, in my personal opinion. As I said, it does really feel like these units were added to fill the gaps rather than particularly suit the Sisters of Twilight, and that's just fine. Nevertheless, units are great additions and do certainly fill those gaps very well, and are supremely powerful, so no complaints here. Of course, I can't forget about the most powerful new unit that's coming, which is, of course, Queen Ariel. And yes, you can get her with the other factions. When I completed my first Ritual of Rebirth in my Orion campaign, I unlocked Queen Ariel, and I don't need to tell you, she's fantastic. I've already gushed about her enough. She is stupidly strong. So she is definitely one of the most powerful units that's been added with this DLC. In fact, I'm going to go out on a limb. She is the most powerful unit being added with this DLC. Okay? Don't at me. So for the new units for the worlds, I'm going to give them a 4 out of 5. Even though they are really, really good units, and I could give them a 5 out of 5 for filling the gaps, I just don't feel like they are brand new and shake up the meta enough to warrant giving them a 5 out of 5. That being said, though, if you do not own all the DLC, you just own Warhammer 2, then buying this DLC will unlock you the Wood Elves and all of their roster, as well as these new units. So it would definitely be a 5 out of 5 for you there, because you're getting so much new content to sink your teeth into. And with the Wood Elf rework, then that content is supremely fun, and you definitely want to give it a try. Now for the new SKAVEN units. To be honest with you, when I heard the SKAVEN were getting a new DLC, I was kind of disappointed, because they already had like 5 legendary lords, and it felt like their meta was just already established. You know, you had Ikitclaw, who brought in the fantastic war machines, you had Lord Skrull, who have a load of plague monks and casters, and then you'd have Queek, who just do whatever he wants, because Queek's just kind of a bit weird. And of course, you have Deathmaster Snitch, who brings all the Eshin units and is very sneaky. So it felt like they already had, decent build variety within each of the factions, and they didn't really need anything else added. But boy was I wrong, because these new units that they bring are really, really fantastic. So none of the standard mares that I just mentioned really utilized monsters in the way that Clan Moulder do. I like the Wood Elf units, these SKAVEN units fill gaps in the roster that have been there since the beginning. So it's really refreshing to see that, and it really does help give you more build variety within your faction. Wolf Rats are now a fantastic early game option for taking out backlines as well as evaporating anything that runs away. Brood Horrors and Mutant Rat Ogres pad out the single entity section of the monstrous units in the SKAVEN. Before we just had the Hell Pit Abomination and it was just a massive ranged target. Well, now we've got a Brood Horror which is extremely fast and therefore maneuverable and therefore can avoid enemy fire, and we have the Mutant Rat Ogre which does a bunch of damage from a small package. So both these units kind of do what the Hell Pit Abomination does, but a little bit better if it's getting focused with fire. And of course, we can't forget about Pack Masters, which really bring the whole faction together with buffs for every single one of the Clan Moulder monsters, including the monsters that we've had since day one. So it really does feel like a more complete system. If you're going for a load of Footlords, then you should probably take one of the new Chieftain units. If you're going with a load of monsters, then you definitely want to take the Packmasters. And if you want to do the weapons team, then you take a Warlock Engineer. It's as simple as that. The Packmasters really do bring it all together. All of these units combined bring a whole new playstyle. You can now rush as the SKAVEN, whereas I always felt like they were a bit of a turtle faction, especially when playing as Dickit Claw. I mean, you could rush with SKAVEN slaves and stuff, but let's be honest, most of the time you'd get some weapons team, some artillery, some war machines like some Doom Wheels, and then a load of slaves. That's all you really needed. Whereas with this new DLC, you can get a monster rush army, which is a completely different playstyle, and it's definitely refreshing. In conclusion, these new units offer a whole new way to play the Rat, and while it may not be as strong when you're not playing Clan Moulder, it is still a new way, and it does add some build variety to your armies if you're getting a little bit bored. So I'd say a 4 out of 5 is fair, since it is really the best with Clan Moulder, but you can also use it with other guys. Our last category is the faction mechanics. Now this is going to cover what they do, how unique they are, what they bring to the vanilla faction, and are they different enough to warrant buying for the entire new faction. The Forge of Dathid is a mechanic for the Sisters of Twilight, and to be honest with you, it's one of the more basic mechanics that we've seen in the recent DLCs. And to be honest, I really think this is down to how they overhauled the Wood Elves. If they had not done a Wood Elf rework, I imagine we would have got a much more complicated Wood Elf mechanic rather than just the Forge of Dathid, because essentially all it is you get items, and you can upgrade items. That's literally it. And let me be honest with you, I like items. I think it's a pretty neat mechanic that probably not a lot of people pay attention to because they just hope it gets sorted out automatically. But giving items to your guys can make a massive difference. And when you can upgrade them all to the highest rarity, you can get them all to purple, then that's certainly useful. But it's just kind of basic. Like, what does it add? You just get more items. If anything, it just adds you more work to do for very minor tweaks and gains. So I can see it not being a fan favorite. All that being said, I think I have to give it like a 2, unfortunately, because it just isn't much. If you already own the Wood Elves, then this just isn't really giving you much different from the free Wood Elf rework that you're going to get. I mean, you get the Vortex campaign, but no one plays Vortex. I mean, like, no one plays Vortex, okay? Everyone wants to play more Empires because it's just huge. And as I said, if you already own the Wood Elves, you're really not getting much. Now, that being said, if you don't own the Wood Elves and you only own Warhammer 2, then buying this, you get the whole new Wood Elves and the entire new rework, and they are a really fantastic faction to play, so you definitely want to pick them up and give them a try. But if you already own them, and you are, you're only buying this for the Wood Elves, then you're probably going to be a little bit disappointed because there's not much different. Now, finally, we come to the SKAVEN mechanic, which is, of course, the Flesh Laboratory. Now, very on brand with the SKAVEN. Their mechanic is very fleshed out. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Now, the SKAVEN on the whole feel very focused. Everything that was coming out of them was focused on the monsters. We have the new units, monsters, with the new lords and the heroes. They're helping the monsters. The new faction mechanic, guess what? It's pretty much to do with monsters. Now, yes, you can buff every single unit in the faction, and that's pretty cool. But the focus on the advertisement was definitely on monsters, let's be honest. And besides, if you mutate in something so heavily, it's going to become a monster anyway. Now, there are a whole bunch of different mutations and augments that you can get within the new Flesh Laboratory. And what that basically means is you have a exponentially large combination of these augments on every single unit in the game. So if you want to think about it like this, and this is a very mathematic way of thinking rather than how it actually plays out, is if you count up every single unit that you have in the SKAVEN roster, you have a nearly unlimited number of combinations that you can do. You can have all of the mutations, you can just have a couple of them, you can have one, you can have two, you can have anything. It's an exponentially large variation on every single unit in the SKAVEN roster, giving you nearly unlimited new units in some sense. In reality, it's very slight tweaks. But, depending on how you choose to think about it, it can be either a lot of content or just a little bit. Now, it is loads of fun rolling the dice, trying to stack on as many mutations as you can, seeing if your unit gets unstable. If they do become unstable, you just recycle them for some growth juice anyway. It is really fun mutating them and seeing what results you get out of it. On top of all of this, you also get the growth fat, which is just something that ticks along and rewards you for fighting battles and recycling your units. We've just given you more monsters to then mutate further and start the whole process again. It really does just sort of feed into itself in a very natural way that just keeps the progression rolling as you move through your campaign. And that's honestly what a faction mechanic should do. Just keep rolling through and keep providing you with incentives to keep playing as you go through the game. Otherwise, you're just going to get bored. All that being said, I can't give this mechanic any less than a 5 out of 5 because, you know, it just brings that much variation. It's really fun and intuitive to use, and it just feeds into itself so well. It's just makes sense to use it while you're playing rather than going out of your way to use it. It's just a really fun and really powerful new SKAVEN mechanic, as if they didn't have enough. So added up, the score is 23 out of 30, which is a pretty good score if you ask me. You know, it's a large percent. I can't work out the percentages off the top of my head. It's about 77%. Okay, that's pretty good. That's what, like a B minus or something. Pretty nice. And to be honest, I think that's a pretty fair reflection of how I feel about this DLC. It does really bring a lot to the table, especially if you consider the Wood Elf rework as part of this DLC, which to be honest you should, because, you know, they released the Wood Elf rework essentially for free, so the DLC sales kind of have to cover the cost of that. So if you think about it, paying for the Wood Elf rework on top of everything else, it's totally worth it for this DLC, in my personal, humble opinion. Yes, this definitely gets a thumbs up for me. Approve. Go buy it. It's good. I wish I had an affiliate link, but I don't. So for £8, you get a bunch of new units that fit exactly into the place where they are needed most in their factions. You get one legendary lord who is truly unique and is really fantastic. You get one lord who isn't the most unique, but he's still a lot of fun and he's pretty damn sexy. You get one faction mechanic that is a little bit underwhelming, but you're also getting a massive rework alongside it. And you get another faction mechanic that's exceptional and packed with content, and honestly is really one of the most fun mechanics for that specific faction. It was a no-brainer for me. If you have £8 and you like playing Warhammer 2, Christmas is coming up, you know, treat yourself. I honestly think it's worth it. Yes, that concludes my review for the Twisted and the Twilight. I hope this video wasn't too overly long drawn out. I'm just looking at my timer right now. I've been going for like half an hour, so I'll try and cut this down to make it nice and concise for you. Because if it goes on too long, then that's just boring. But yes, thank you so very much for watching. If you have enjoyed any of this DLC content, please do consider subscribing. I would really appreciate it so much. I worked very hard on this. It was my birthday when the DLC came out, and I haven't really relaxed since then. So if you'll excuse me, I'm not going to have a video on Friday. I'll see you on the stream on Saturday or Sunday, whatever it is. So goodbye. Yes, goodbye. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. I've been COLONELDAMNEDERS. So goodbye.